Hello everyone, Action here. So today the devs released a massive dev diary for the Nomads DLC, and honestly, after reading through all of these mechanics, I'm starting to think that ARKSHIPS might become one of the strongest systems we have ever seen added into Stellaris. We finally got actual numbers for their construction costs, their combat stats, how warfare against Nomads is going to work, so there is a lot to cover here, and some of these mechanics are honestly kind of insane. So let's begin immediately with the ARKSHIPS themselves, because now we finally know how these things are going to be built and what exactly is supposed to limit them. Now, before this dev diary, one of the biggest questions everyone had was whether ARKSHIPS were going to have some kind of a hard cap, because if these things were cheap or easy to mass produce, Nomadic Empires would probably spiral completely out of control. A lot of people theorized that they would either require absurd alloy investments, high influence costs, or perhaps empire caps, but now we finally know the answer. The primary limitation for ARKSHIPS is going to be influence. The very first tier of an ARKSHIP is going to cost 500 influence, which is already half of your maximum influence stockpile of 1000. Then to upgrade the ARKSHIP to tier 2 and tier 3, you are going to need another 250 influence for each upgrade stage, meaning that fully upgrading a single ARKSHIP from tier 1 all the way to tier 3 costs an entire influence cap by itself of 1000 influence just for one fully upgradable mobile planet. Now, in terms of construction time, they actually build surprisingly quickly. Tier 1 only takes around 2 years to complete, tier 2 takes 900 days, and tier 3 takes another 3 years, meaning that from the start to finish, a fully upgraded ARKSHIP takes around 7.5 years total. Personally, I suspect that the first stage is probably affected by megastructure build speed modifiers, because the dev diary specifically describes the initial construction as functioning like a megastructure, while the later upgrades are handled through the ARKSHIP control interface instead. We still don't fully know which modifiers affect those upgrades, but realistically, late game empires are probably going to reduce this timer significantly, so 7.5 years is likely just the baseline scenario. Now, obviously the influence cost is massive, but honestly I don't even think influence is the real bottleneck early on. I think the real bottleneck is alloys, because yes, getting 500 influence at the start of the game is difficult, but getting 10,000 alloys while also trying to snowball your economy and tech, because keep in mind, districts for Nomadic Empires, they cost alloys. That's going to be brutal, especially consider that Nomads still need to maintain way stations, infrastructure, logistic ships, and all of their mobile economy systems. So early on, alloys are probably the main thing limiting ARKSHIP production, but later into the game, influence actually becomes less useful for Nomads Empires compared to settled empires. Remember, Nomads cannot traditionally claim systems, and they cannot conquer planets in the normal way, meaning they are not constantly spending influence on territorial expansion. And once you start looking at how strong the ARKSHIPS are, that becomes very scary as well. Because previously I was theorizing that the ARKSHIPS would probably land somewhere between Titans and Juggernauts in terms of overall strength, but after seeing the actual numbers from the dev diary, no, those things can be stronger than Juggernauts, like legitimately stronger. All types of ARKSHIPS are going to come with innate ship components built directly into the hull itself. The civilian and scientific variants mainly focus on strikecraft and point defense as their baseline setup, which makes sense because they are not frontline warships, but the Military Arkship is absolutely stacked. It comes with strikecraft, medium weapons, large weapons, and point defense as its base configuration, and that is before you start customizing the thing yourself using the module system, because as you know, you can install additional weapon systems, utility modules, defensive capabilities, and specialized components directly into the vessel itself through the interface. The devs showed an example loadout where the defensive profile was split roughly half and half between shields and armor, while the offensive setup used psionic bombers, drone launchers, and psionic lightning weaponry. And when you actually open the ship designer, you can visibly see all of these modifiers integrated in the ARKSHIP layout itself. So this thing is not just a ship, it is basically part planet, part megastructure, part shipyard, part everything. thing. Now the ridiculous part is actually the combat stats. The tier 3 military Arkship shown by the devs had around 10,000 hull, 22,000 armor and 33,000 shields. Now initially the hull value sounds low because the normal Juggernaut has 100,000 hull before modifiers, but the layered defenses on the Arkships are significantly stronger overall. It is much more shield and armor focused, and depending on the repeatables and other modifiers, these things could become incredibly annoying to kill. But the real insanity is the damage output. The example Arkship shown in the dev diary was dealing roughly 1300 damage per day. For a comparison, a standard Juggernaut usually sits somewhere around 500 to 600 damage per day before other modifiers. So this thing is potentially outputting more than double the damage of a Juggernaut while also functioning as a mobile colony and economy hub. And then we get to the district scaling mechanics, which honestly might be the most broken part about the entire system. Originally I thought that the districts themselves would provide small percentage bonuses, something simple like plus 5% energy weapon damage or plus 5% kinetic damage per district, but apparently the bonuses are not tied directly to the districts themselves. Instead, they scale from the jobs generated by those districts. According to the dev diary, you gain plus 5% weapon damage per 100 soldiers or warrior drones if you are just old empire. Now here's the important part. Every military focused district appears to generate around 200 of these jobs, meaning that every single district effectively grants plus 10% weapon damage. Now the example Arkship shown by the devs had 30 districts available. Obviously not all of them are going to be military focused because you still need city districts, and optimally you would also get the other district zones, but hypothetically if you dedicated around 27 districts purely toward military power, you would be looking at roughly 270% weapon damage. That is absurd. At that point the Arkship basically stops being a ship and becomes a mobile extinction event, and if you specialize entirely into one weapon category like energy weapons or strike crafts, then all of your weapons potentially scale together under that gigantic modifier. Now we still don't know whether multiple ordnance specializations can coexist on the same Arkship, because the wording from the dev diary suggests that you probably choose one ordnance engineering path and heavily specialize into it instead of mixing several different ones together. But even if that's the case, the scaling already looks ridiculous. And then we get to their exclusive T-slot weapon, which honestly looks very terrifying. This thing is basically the Arkship version of a Perdition Beam, except it is stronger in every single category. The weapon shown by the devs deals roughly 50% more damage than a standard Perdition Beam, has higher collateral damage, a larger area of effect radius, and perhaps most importantly, it gains bonus shield damage. That is huge because standard Perdition Beams actually suffer shield damage penalties. This weapon does not, meaning it is devastating against basically every defensive layer in the game. So if you get hit by one of these things late game with all of those district modifiers stacked on top, your fleets are probably just gone. Now another huge reveal from the dev diary is how warfare against nomadic empires is actually gonna work. And honestly this system functions very well, because one of the biggest questions everyone had was how exactly you invade a nomadic civilization. These are not planets, they are mobile megastructures. You cannot traditionally bombard them, and you cannot land armies on them like normal colonies. In previous videos we already started noticing hints of this, because the Arkships didn't appear to have defensive armies at all, only assault armies, which led us to theorize that Nomads would use armies offensively for occupations, but would not actually defend their ships through traditional evasions or boarding actions. Now we have confirmation. Arkships cannot be invaded, they can only be disabled or destroyed, but here is the really important part. Arkships are not automatically destroyed when they lose combat. Instead, they function more like mobile starbases. Once an Arkship reaches 0 hull, it becomes disabled and drops out of combat instead of exploding instantly. Honestly, this is a gigantic relief, because before this dev diary, I was genuinely worried that nomadic empires could randomly lose because you accidentally wandered into a Leviathan system early game and instantly lost your civilization. But thankfully that is not how it works. Now for the standard empire wars, disabled Arkships remain inactive until the war ends, and once the peace is concluded, the outcome depends on the war goals. Genocidal empires, however, are a completely different story. Determined exterminators, devouring swarms, fanatic purifiers, and similar types of civics will simply destroy the Arkship Arkship outright. No recover, no escape, no second chances. This is also the same case for the endgame crisis. If an endgame crisis destroy your Arkship in combat, it will instantly blow it up. It won't make the Arkship disengage and repair itself outside of their territory. Now another really interesting warfare mechanic is Nomads versus Nomads combat. Nomads can actually declare war on other Nomads and directly take over enemy Arkships. They gain access to a special raiding casus belli that allows them to capture enemy Arkships and way stations immediately after disabling them in combat. So effectively, Nomad wars become a form of total war. You disable the ship, you take it, done. No need to even wait for the war to end, and honestly that sounds amazing because it creates this really aggressive scavenger pirate gameplay loop where nomadic civilizations are constantly hunting each other for infrastructure and population centers. Nomads also gain easy access to the subjugation wars. Normally, standard empires need superiority in economy, military, and tech before demanding vassalizations, but Nomads only need military superiority. Personally, I'm not entirely sure I understand the rationale behind this, because ARKSHIPS themselves are probably going to massively inflate the military power calculations already, but regardless, it is undeniably a buff and potentially a very strong one if you're going for a vassal run. Now, settled empires will have ways to remove Nomads from their territory. You can declare a special expulsion war that deletes Nomad wait stations within your borders, forces their fleets out of your systems, and compels them to respect the closed borders during the truce period. So weaker empires may struggle to push Nomads away, but there is at least a countermeasure available if you do not want the Nomads inside your territory. But anyway, commanders, that's going to be it for this Dev Diary breakdown. Honestly, after seeing all of this information, I'm starting to think that ARKSHIPS may become one of the strongest mechanics ever added into Stellaris. The scaling potential looks so ridiculous, the warfare system looks genuinely very cool, but let me know what you guys think. Do you think that the ARKSHIPS are too strong? Do you think the massive influence and alloy cost will actually balance them out? And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If it did provide you with some information and insight about the future of Stellaris, leave a like because it also helps me out a lot. And as always, commanders, I'll see you guys next time.